All right, we're ready to do this? Okay. So we left off. Hey, what's up? Sure, go for it. So what we're taking a look at is the new states in the West and new technology. So we got a lot of growth out west. The railroad and the ranching industry and the large-scale farming industry and the mining industry, these are all reasons that the West begins to grow. So Nevada, Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, all these are going to be developed as a result of this widespread expansion and the continued subjugation of the Native Americans, who are being forced to even tighter reservations, and in some case outside of the Rockies and outside of the Pacific Northwest. By 1912, all of the states from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the continental states, will be added, New Mexico and Arizona being the last two continental states ratified. But obviously the new advancements in technology are going to lead to the growth of more cities out west, cities like Denver, San Francisco, Los Angeles, we mentioned before. And some of the new inventions that are going to allow for that: steel rails. Obviously steel's been around a long time, but the mass production of steel rails, improvements in railroads, automobiles. In the late 1800s, there's a lot of automobile factories. They're all over the place. We even had one in Richmond, the Klein Car Company. But that car would have taken weeks to build by hand. What Henry Ford is going to do is use assembly line technology at the turn of the century. It's cranking out a car just about every 9 minutes, right? Oh yeah. So you're cranking out cars really fast because of assembly line production. He also starts. What's that?
Like an entire car?
Yeah, Model A, Model T. They're like increasing their workers' wages. They are lowering their hours. Ford did all this stuff to prevent his workers from doing what? Unionizing. Good. Joining unions. The Wright brothers glider airplane is flown at Kitty Hawk. Their 1902 glider. We talked about the light bulb and the development of electricity with guys like Edison. We talked about the new electrical current improvements thanks to Tesla, telephone, Graham Bell, the electric dynamo, vacuum cleaners, sewing machine. But obviously there's a lot of limited liability. Jarvis did a good job of pointing that out earlier. Limited liability is you're not really having to take care of labor, you're not really having to take care of consumers. And somebody that's going to really step up as we move forward into Lesson 5 that takes on the limited liability problem is going to be Teddy Roosevelt with a plan called the Square Deal that we'll talk more about later. This also leads to the rise of these national labor unions and some pretty significant industrial conflict. And much of that conflict results in some pretty violent strikes. So we looked at Deadwood, South Dakota, just after the American Civil War. It looked like sort of a lawless town and, hard living. And now let's look at it at the turn of the century, celebrating July 4th, 1888. Deadwood, it's hustling, it's bustling. It looks a whole lot different than it had just 20 years prior. I love this picture of New York at the turn of the century. We've got our skyscrapers with Otis elevators. We have our streetcars. New York's in the process of building underground subways at this time. The guys are wearing their bowler caps. This is at the crossroads of Broadway and Fulton. And remember who Fulton was? The inventor of the steamboat, Robert Fulton. Here's Orville and Wilbur Wright, the Wright brothers from Dayton, Ohio, flying their 1902 glider at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Anybody ever visited the historical site down there? It's really cool. If you ever go down to the Outer Banks, take just an hour or two to go check it out. It's well worth your time. Ford's assembly line in Dearborn, Michigan. This is a production of the Model A. They're just cranking these out. Did I ever tell you guys we have a Model T in our family?
Really?
Yeah. So it was my great grandfather's Model T, and then it was handed down to my grandmother and grandfather, and then handed down to my uncle, and now my oldest cousin currently has it. And I remember riding around in it when I was little. We didn't go far. We just, do like laps in town. I grew up in a small town, so we would drive it around. They've kept it in a garage for
This?
about 100 years. Yep.
Oh my god, I love those cars.
Yeah, no, it's that one, the hard top.
Oh my god.
I love these cars.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
How does this
cool.
work?
It was pretty awesome. Well, my grandfather and my uncle worked on it forever, and I don't know if my cousin's pretty busy. He might. I hope he does. I'll probably continue to give him a hard time about it.
You want it?
I did. I don't know. It's just going to be a lot,
That would cost a lot of money.
Yeah, well, it is kind of a money pit, Anytime you're going to be working with cars, you're going to have to just think about a little bit of the loss, especially a car that's just turned 100, So let's take a look at some of the poor working conditions for labor during this era at the turn of the century. Dangerous working conditions for men, women, and children. Child labor was a huge problem. Children abused in the workforce and underpaid. This leads to the Children's Bureau being established during the presidency of Woodrow Wilson. Talk a little bit about that when we get into the lesson 5, the Progressive Era, and Wilson's New Freedom Plan. Long hours, low wages, no job security, no benefits. So you could be working 14, 16 hours a day. Your wage, depending on what you were doing or what your background was, could be extremely low. You might not be able to keep your job. So let's say that you get hurt on the workforce, you might just be replaced, like fired, no workman's compensation, and then there's no benefits, no paid vacations, not even health care at this period of time, and that lends to the limited liability of corporations. Question or comment?
No, it's a comment. Isn't that like how schools became like the how when the bureau came in and like they didn't have
Yeah.
to do with the kids anymore?
That's right. So that leads to the growth. The Children's Bureau does lead to a large-scale growth of public education, and truancy becomes a part of law, basically, that kids need to be going to school, they need to be getting an education, because you'd have these kids that work in factories or selling newspapers or painting, tin cans or whatever. It's like they do that for their entire life, and it's like, oh, you don't know how to read and write. That's a larger problem for society. That's why I'm a big crusader for public education. It's easy to kick us around as a nation and be like, oh, your scores are so low, we're doing this on a larger level than anyone else, And what we're doing is modern day mission work. We're doing the right thing. And that's why you see educators that really give their life to education, they are trying to do the right thing, day in and day out. It's like we have a greater purpose for society. It's not just about, you almost have to look at the big picture, and that's what a lot of these folks were looking at, was a big picture on how public education could really become like a pillar of society in a democratic republic. And sometimes you have to even explain that to people in present day community. Like, it's been a while, but there was a guy that I read that was like, I don't believe I should have to pay taxes for education after my kids graduate. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. That these people, all the people that you're paying taxes to help go to school are going to take care of you, whether it be, the person that, pours your coffee or the person that, lifts you into your hospital bed at a nursing home. You're educating them all along the way. And that's an important endeavor, I had to really calm myself down in that particular conversation. So company towns, this is where people lived where they worked. Company towns were a big problem. And the problem with company towns, it really didn't end until about the 1970s. So whether it be logging or coal mining or steel, a company town is basically, you show up, hey, glad to have you. Come on in. We got you a job. We got you a place to live. Just go over to the company store and buy everything you need. And then it comes time for your first check, and you don't get any money because you owe us rent. You owe us for the groceries and all the supplies you bought. And then finally, when you climb out of debt, I'm going to pay you in currency that I've created, like company town money. So you're basically you're getting paid Chuck E. Cheese tokens to work, and the only place to use your Chuck E. Cheese tokens is my company store. So kind of the crazy thing about it is that there's a number of states that didn't, West Virginia being one of them, they didn't outlaw company town money until like the early 1970s. Crazy. Women are going to be paid about roughly half to 75% less than men during this era. All right. So we got kids working in a textile industry. So let's say the little Jimmy here gets his arm caught in this belt. Limited liability would mean, sorry about your arm, Jimmy. We're going to hire little Billy down here to take your place on the end of the bobbin box. So these kids are changing spools out, right? And then to bring up the previous point of public education, there's a point in time where these kids are just like, they're born into this system, whether it be like a textile mill or a company town, where they just have to like keep working. How many people have ever seen the film October Sky with Jake Gyllenhaal? Kids are inspired to build a rocket because they see Sputnik and they get scholarships to Virginia Tech. They lived in a company town. That's a true story. That really happened. These are the houses that you would have seen in a company town. How many people have gone to Snowshoe, West Virginia before? Anybody? You have driven through a company town. You drove through a little town called Cass, West Virginia. They got little white houses, and they've got a little store and a train station. It's like a historically preserved company town. They're like trying to say like, this is what happened here. This is how, and these houses are like half the size of this room. And some of them are just one story, some of them are two story. And that's what they lived in. All right, so the rise of labor unions, a large influx of immigrants provided labor force that obviously there were low wages, poor working environments. So suppose you go on strike, right? And you decide you're not going to work. How might that boss of yours go around you, right? Well, they could hire strike breakers. These people are called scabs. They would come in and work in your place. You would not be very happy to see a scab cross the line. So you might actually fight or try to kill the scab that's trying to take your job. All right? Because they're taking food out of your mouth, right? They're going to walk, you're trying to get labor rights, and they're just going to walk around you and walk in and take your job.
So you resort to
That's what a lot of these people did. And we're going to talk about these violent uprisings that occurred. You also have people like what we would call collective bargaining. So it's like you guys go on strike and you have somebody will represent you and Will comes to the table and I'm the boss and Will wants higher pay for you and I don't want to do it. Well, we might bring Maggie in to be our collective bargainer. She will be our negotiator. She's going to try to compromise to get us a little bit of what each of us wants so we don't kill each other, all right? Or, everything doesn't shut down. That's the idea of collective bargaining. So these were problems then. Another issue are yellow dog oaths or ironclad oaths. A yellow dog oath or an ironclad oath would be like, let's say I'm the boss and I don't want you to join a union. I will make you sign an oath that you will either not join or an oath that you will leave the union, and if you sign that contract, you will be fired if you join the union. You could also be blacklisted, like if one of you decides to pull like a Jerry Maguire and run out of the room and say, "Who's going with me?" and nobody goes with you, and you try to launch this major labor uprising, and I say, "Hey, good riddance, you no longer have a job with me or anyone else I know," that would potentially sort of stifle your plan or limit your plan in creating a labor strike. So who are the unions? Well, remember we learned about an early union movement before the Civil War. Civil War kind of pumped the brakes on the unions. Well, now we're back to unions, and a year after the Civil War, the National Labor Union was formed. It's pretty significant, over 500,000 members. They tapped into unskilled and skilled workers, but there were a few problems that led to their demise. Number one, they were not inclusive of African Americans. Number two, they were not inclusive of female membership. And number three, they could not sustain the Panic of 1873 that occurred after the collapse of Jay Cook and Company. And, we talked about the cause of Black Friday with that event as well. So a new group sort of comes in and kind of carries the torch. They're known as the Knights of Labor. They're definitely one of the largest unions in this era. Their membership reached almost 1 million, and they were led by a guy named Uriah Stevens. They were a bit pious, meaning like they wanted membership of like honest labor. So they're looking for like miners, they're looking for steel workers, they're looking for skilled and unskilled labor. They allowed for women to join, they allowed for African Americans to join. They were not interested in bringing in like anybody that was connected to like prostitution or gambling or liquor production or any of that. So that like kind of left the casinos and the saloons and those groups out. They also had one of the first female labor leaders. Her name was Mary Harris Jones. Her nickname was Mother Jones. She was a leader of the miners. And then the guy that took control of them is a guy by the name of Terrence Powderly, who will leave the union. So you have a number of other, two of the Knights' biggest victories. They successfully led a strike against Jay Gould's corrupt Wabash Railroad, and they actually won the 8-hour workday. So we can thank the Knights for that. Some other notable unions: the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, the American Railway Union, the ARU. That was led by, American Federation of Labor, AFL, was led by Samuel Gompers. The American Railway Union and the International Workers of the World, the Wobblies, were led by Eugene V. Debs. So Gompers for the AFL, ARU, and the Wobblies for Debs. The Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, a lot of the workers that will become the United Miners Workers Union and the United Steel Workers Union. International Ladies Garment Workers Union, they came to rise to power after the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire, where hundreds of women were killed in 1911 in New York City. The Molly Maguires, they were actually a vigilante group of mostly Irish miners, some of which were actually tied to violence, and some were branded as anarchists. So here on the left we have Uriah Stevens, and the middle there with the very awesome mustache is Terrence Powderly. On the right there's Mother Jones, and down below that's their slogan: 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest. But the Knights turned a bit violent. Members of the Knights of Labor, who were workers of the McCormick Reaper factory near Haymarket Square, Chicago, went on strike. And on May 4th, 1886, after a months-long lockout and the involvement of Pinkerton agents, the heavily numbered Knights in the city led a violent strike when some members threw a dynamite bomb into the crowd of police officers trying to put down the riot, and it ended up leading to a number of people being injured and 7 police officers being killed. Once the dust settled on this particular riot, the members that they rounded up involved with the dynamite bomb, some of which may have been and some of which may not have been, it was a bit of a witch hunt, were actually anarchist members, anarchist card-carrying members of the Knights of Labor. So ultimately, the Haymarket Square riot and this particular dynamite bomb on May 4th, 1886, brings about an end to the Knights of Labor, the skilled and unskilled workers union in the United States. Now we move on to the American Federation of Labor. This labor union was led by Samuel Gompers, cigar maker. They were a labor union that demanded fair share for labor, meaning fair wages. They also demanded a National Labor Day, which they won. We still observe our National Labor Day in September. How many people reflect on Labor Day? Well, we all participate in Labor Day, right? But do we really reflect on it? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's something we should reflect on, because whether you support unions or don't support unions, one thing that we all have in common in this room, either today or eventually, we're all going to work, right? We're all going to perform some type of labor. So we have that common bond. And labor in a democratic republic means we have the freedom to work where we want to work, right? But with that freedom, there should also be rights in the labor force. We got to remember, when it comes to Labor Day, a lot of blood was shed for us to be able to have basic things like an 8-hour workday and workers' compensation and basic health care in the labor force. So a little problem with the AFL Gompers Union. They limited membership of African Americans, they limited membership of minority immigrant groups, and they limited membership of women. They also limited the membership of unskilled labor. So they only tapped into about 3% of the labor force, but they keep on going. In fact, they still have a presence today. Has anybody ever heard of the AFL-CIO? It's a labor union that still exists, all right? So it's, they go away for a while, but they've always sort of kept a skilled labor presence in America. The next large-scale unskilled skilled labor group is going to come about a bit later with the international workers of the world. We'll talk a bit about them in lesson 5. Another group, a pretty interesting statistic I wanted to point out, from the sort of through the Gilded Age, so the post-Reconstruction era to the turn of the century. Check this out, nearly 23,000 strikes involving over 6.5 million workers in the United States. That's a pretty wild statistic, all right? And a lot of these strikes were violent. Not all of them, but many were. Strikes like we talked about, the Great Upheaval in 1877, Haymarket Square on May 4th, 1886. Another strike I want to talk about too is going to be a couple of other strikes that I want to mention, one of which is going to be led by Eugene V. Debs, who was inspired by the AFL. He'll go on to lead the American Railway Union, the ARU. So there's cigar maker and union leader of the AFL, Samuel Gompers, on the left, American Railway Union leader, Eugene V. Debs. He will go on to lead the International Workers of the World, the Wobblies, and he will become the leader of the American Socialist Party. He runs for president as a socialist candidate from jail. We're going to take a look at that in future lesson. So let's talk about some additional violent strikes. Homestead strike, Carnegie Steel Mill strike in June of 1892 through July. Carnegie was back in Scotland, where he was from, visiting that summer. The guy that was running the mill was a guy by the name of Henry Clay Frick. Frick decided it would be a good idea to cut wages and let the workers know that he was not going to improve work conditions at the mill because it would cost them money.
It's like he's asking for it.
He was asking for it, and a guy died in the mills that summer. So Frick posted a notice that nothing was going to change, so the mill shut down, they barricaded the mill, and they started to arm themselves with whatever rocks and weapons they could gather. So who does Frick call? The Pinkertons. Very good. Frick calls the Pinkertons, and the Pinkertons come in, and what will ensue is a violent uprising and battle that leads to the death of 9 steelworkers and 3 Pinkertons, with many others wounded from this particular strike. It also leads to the collapse of the AA, the Amalgamated Associations Union, there at Homestead Mill. Pullman Company town strike. We've already learned about George Pullman, Palace Company car guy. Well, he decided to cut wages by 35% in his company town outside of Chicago. The American Railway Union, they were members there, and their leader, Eugene B. Debs, decided to lead a violent strike. Like 6 people were killed in this one. And the group that put this one down were not only Pinkertons, but were actually the U.S. military, because Grover Cleveland said that the particular strike was interfering with the postal system. And then this one is a wild one that really kind of gets left out of a lot of the history books, and that is the Battle of Blair Mountain in Logan County, West Virginia. In the last days of August and the beginning of September of 1921, between 10 and 15,000 coal miners went to war, a full-on armed battle with nearly 30,000 police, Pinkertons, and National Guard members. They fired nearly 1 million rounds of ammunition. 1,000 people were wounded and killed in this particular labor battle. This is the bloodiest labor battle in American history. So I find it important to explain the struggle and the violence and the bloodshed that ensued in this era for us to really have and sort of take for granted, I think, a lot of times, our most basic labor rights. Okay? Again, I don't have any pro-union or by no means any socialistic type of agenda. I just think it's important to highlight this because it would be very difficult to think about Rachel and the employees at Chick-fil-A taking up arms and like going to war with corporate, right? It's just hard to like wrap our head around that. So, sorry, I'm just trying to remember where everybody works. So that's kind of like where my head's at. I hope that this all kind of makes sense. And did you guys have any questions? All right, cool. Yeah, what's up? What the punishment of the anarchists was at Haymarket Square? Was that it? All of the people, all the anarchists that were, some of them were did not even admit to being a part of it, tried, convicted, all of them executed for Haymarket Square. Yeah. I should have said that earlier.